Hello. Feel free to come on. Oh,
Hello, hold on.
how
There
are
we
you?
go. Doing well, sir. I've been wanting to talk to you.
Yeah, I saw when you came and talked to Jacob the other day. I
Oh,
didn't.
yes, sir.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm actually driving home from class. Do you mind if I take the camera down so I can, drive
Sure.
hands free and talk to
Yeah.
you?
No worries. Yeah.
All right. Oh, 1 second. All right. Well, it's good to speak to you. I, I heard you talking about your trades class you wanted to do, and with teaching the gospel, and that's
Yeah.
something that really interested me, and I'd like to talk to you about it if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I was actually just kind of typing some stuff. I'm trying to get like my kind of pitch together to make it more of a public thing. So hopefully, I mean, I can talk about it. It's not like it's a secret, but just before I present it to the world, I want it to kind of be everything to be a little bit more in place with how I'm planning to do it. But what were your thoughts about it?
Well, I was gonna email you. I'd asked you for your email, but I hadn't got around to it yet. But so I've done quite a bit of disaster relief mission work,
Mm-hmm.
um, and something that we have or something. So I'm not very skilled when it comes to the gospel. Um, but something that the guys that I would work with would do is we'd have like a 30-minute meeting before we went out and started doing some of the flood repairs or some of the mud outs.
Yeah.
And he would just they would talk about the gospel for 20, 30 minutes and things to think about, little mini Bible study, I guess you could say. And
Mm-hmm.
we would work on it, you know, work on doing the work we're doing until about lunchtime. Then we'd take a 20-minute break to talk about what our reflections were about what the Bible study was, and another 10-minute Bible study that went with the original Bible study, like an expansion. And then
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, we would talk about some of the reflections we had while we were working, doing the mud outs.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's about pretty much the exactly kind of like the idea that I had in mind. You know, because I think that you don't need hours and hours of information. You get that. When you're working, you can just kind of think on things over and over, and especially if you're trying to think about how what you were reading or talking about connects to what you're doing. So, because I often find that while I'm working, like I'll think about various passages of scripture, and just as I'm working, all of a sudden they'll sort of like click into place and how they connect, and it's just I think our brains are more powerful in their when we're letting them do with their own thing than sometimes when we're just concentrating real hard on a problem. So
Right. Well, I think the trick would be is to know what the gospel well enough to and the work you're doing well enough to pick the passages that will work well with the type of work you're doing at that time.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that'd be the hardest part of it.
Well, so my plan is once I kind of get, should be pretty soon here. I think I'll have kind of the basic plan of how I want things to work together, and then what I plan to do was start to say probably like it's going to be a year out, and then I was going to start writing like the devotionals, and maybe put it on one of the like a Substack, so people that want to support it could support it, so that I can quit my job, uh, maybe in the future, and then to make that transition, uh, but that was kind of my idea. So I would take that way I'll have time to work on it, but it'll help me to get the material out and having a commitment to write it on a regular basis. So I figure after about a year or so, I should have, if I can put a couple out each week, just short kind of devotional, things with those kind of questions to think about. And then I'll be able to publish it or whatever, but because yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, well, my idea is, I kind of want to do this like myself, but I really want it to be something that other people can do as well. Like anybody who has a business, like maybe they could take on an apprentice, because I think that there's so many like godly men that work in the trades that have businesses and stuff. They probably don't get a lot of opportunity to, talk or share on like in a Sunday morning or something. But if they understand the gospel personally, they just have to figure out how could they explain it, not to anybody, but just to somebody else who also, thinks like they do. And then that should be easier for most people, I think, than making it all like a universal message. So
Right. Right. Well, one of the ways I think you could pilot it is well, like in our area we have 5 or 6 construction ministries, and we all pull off one another. If we need 3 or 4 guys to replace a hot water heater or something, for charity work, we'll come together one Sunday afternoon or one Monday afternoon and go knock it out right fast. And so and so what I do professionally is I'm a facility maintenance man. So I maintain large event spaces, and so one of the things I do for quite a few of the local churches around me, they're all very small. The big churches, all amount of people, so they don't have enough money for to hire actual man. So we do a couple times a year. We'll put together some people in the church, and I'll go through and explain to them what to do and teach them how to do certain things like clean light fixtures and things like that, just to spruce the places up. That might be something really good where I could, or if I had that information available when I went to one of these churches and had 5 or 6 of their members, helping me clean, tidy their church up, be somewhere like that.
You're cutting out a little bit, but I think we could hear most of what you said. But yeah, that's an interesting thing, because that was another kind of I'm gonna you just send me email me something, and then I'll email you what I've got so far written down, and you can check it out, because I'd love to have your opinion on things. But I kind of had some ideas about that too, like because I thought some of the goal would be that at least like the young men that would come and would learn, part of the program would be that you have to be involved in a local church. It wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily make it, if I was, if I go out on my own on a business and I can have a couple guys, I wouldn't necessarily insist they go to my church, but they need to go to a church. And, because that's kind of the habit, I think. And then they would be those people that can really help out with all sorts of stuff in a local church. Because, my dad was a pastor of a very small church, but he had a lot of handyman skills, which was necessary. But if you don't have those skills, as this pastor of a small church, then you need to have somebody in there who can do a lot of that stuff, because they definitely don't teach you how to do that in Bible college. So
no, sir. Yeah, I've had quite a few preachers where I just had to teach the basic stuff. But there's probably at one point when I was not thinking clearly, I had about 9 churches I was helping maintain, and that it got way too much.
Yeah.
It was just too much, and that's when I started incorporating the people from church. But the good thing about that is now, because the church I go to is it's a large building, but it doesn't have 80 people in it, but it's a building that can house 400, and we just don't have enough able members to help me anymore. But because I help other churches, the other church members come and give me a hand. So it's a pretty big blessing. So we have a small group of about 12 people that help each other maintain their own churches. And some of those guys have gotten pretty good, where they didn't know anything before. Now they can change light sockets and fixtures and air filters and do a little spackling. But being able to do the gospel while in that would just be a treasure.
Yeah. And I mean, that was kind of my whole idea, is that, I just see just the way that everybody does life is so disconnected, and we always compartmentalize everything. So you have your church thing is on Sunday, and then your work is totally separate, and your family is totally separate. And that's just not the way that we're really supposed to live. And I think it's neat even that you're working with the other guys in the other churches, because I think that's even an important thing too, especially for the small churches. Like when I grew up in my dad's church, there was no big mega churches. This was up in New England. It was all small churches. And so if they wanted to put on some sort of an event, they'd have some day of prayer kind of thing, and they'd do it in the town park, and you'd get all the churches together. They would all work together, and that was kind of, that's kind of a really special thing. So so I just think that any of those kind of ways, they're such just simple practical things, but it'll help the world make a little more sense, I think. I see got some other folks watching. If anybody else wants to come on, you feel free. I don't know if Bill's connection is working. Hello.
Hey, Michael. How are you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thinking about the old project there, it looks like.
Yeah. I was just talking to Bill. There he goes. I think his connection was not so great, so he was driving, so that's not reliable. I found
not
that
ideal.
out. Yeah.
What idea. No, it's good. Have you fleshed out your ideas a little bit more? And
Yeah, so that's what we were just talking about. So I kind of yes, so I'm almost done with like my, I got like one document that's kind of like this is the philosophy behind the whole thing, one that's kind of like here's how it could work practically, and then
Mhm.
I'm working on the name that I've got like the most important part of the name figured out, but just haven't quite details. So my
Mhm.
plan is I'm gonna start like another a Substack, and I'm gonna take probably a year or so, and I'm gonna try to write all the like devotional lesson material and release it, through the year, and that way, people can pay if they want to help me be able to quit my job and go out on my own or whatever. And then I have a few people that I want to try to like interview to who are people who have been either working in trades or similar things, and who have like some experience. So that's
Mhm.
basically the idea. So I'm figuring maybe about a year of like promotional time, and then hopefully I can start something in about a year. So
Oh, I like that. That's a really cool approach. I like that. I like that idea. Yeah, that
yeah,
sounds
well,
good.
I just absorb all the random stuff that you watch on YouTube. It just kind of coalesces in your brain, and an idea comes together. So
No, that's good. That's really good. Yeah, and the stuff that Manuel and I have been working on for the past 2.5 years is around containers and ritual and how to make those things work better, right? Practices and that sort of stuff. So if you need help or whatever on that, feel free to pop in and let us know on Discord, and we'll happily point you to the stuff that we have.
yeah, I think I probably also will have to start a Discord server too to compile people and things that want to help, because what I was saying too is like I want it to be kind of like an open source thing. So I'm thinking, I can write the material and then anybody could use the material. So even if a
Hmm.
guy has one apprentice, he can just have that material to, integrate into the day. And then, but you could also make it a big, huge thing if you had the
Oh, right.
resources. So,
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a good approach. I think it's fantastic. I'm glad you've thought about it and are moving forward on it. That's wonderful.
yeah, thank you. So, how's life out there? You're near
Yeah.
Columbia, right?
Yeah, I'm near Columbia, South Carolina. Yeah.
My father-in-law lives in Irmo.
Oh,
So,
okay. Down the street. Yeah, I know where
yeah,
Irmo is.
yeah. Well, next time I'm visiting, maybe we can
Yeah,
get a
yeah.
lunch in person or something. I don't know when that will be, but
Absolutely.
I will be there
Yeah,
at
I'd love
some
that.
point. So
And
cool.
you're up in New England, right?
No, I'm from Massachusetts, but I live in Texas now. So
You're in Texas. Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, I went for uh, the cost of living. Like I can actually afford a house doing carpentry. Not
I uh I do know. Yes,
yeah,
I very much know.
yeah,
Yeah, Massachusetts is insane. So, yeah.
yeah. My wife gets semi homesick from time to time. I mean, her dad moved down to South Carolina where you are, and all my family's here in Texas now. So
Oh, okay.
I mean, I don't care. We can never go back, but we've gone. She has an aunt, and her brother lives in New Hampshire, and so we were up there this summer, but I'm just like, ugh, it's so expensive. Like everything, like just like I don't know. I'm pretty happy here, even though the culture I enjoyed, and all the historical things and everything. But then it's also so woke. Like
Well, yeah, really, it's really changed. It didn't used to be that bad, and yeah, I mean, a couple people have asked me why you left New England. I'm like, no, 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 New England left me. Like the place I grew up in is not here anymore, and I can't, the loss is too much to bear in some sense. So
Yeah, that's what I used to say. Like I used to be up there and listen to NPR on the radio all the time, and it was great. And they talked about all the cultured things, and now it's just nonsense all
unbelievable.
the time. Yeah.
I had NPR on months ago, but the woman on there was, she's interviewing a lawyer. The state of New York was suing on behalf of the Firemen's Association or whatever over the mask issue, and she got aggressive with the guy and said that's not true. And he's like, "Well, look, we're submitting this to court because this is what the doctor said." She's like, "That's not true." And I was like, "What happened to NPR? Like, what are they doing? You don't do that. You're interviewing somebody. Like, what is wrong with you?" Yeah, it's really sad to see that sort of the destruction of something that was once wonderful. And it's hard. Like my friends and most of my family's still up there, but on the other hand, I don't want to go someplace where there are crazy mask people and woke people and all kinds of problems. And yeah, it's too bad that things have crumbled that way. I've got a video on navigating patterns on the fall of the fourth estate, and I think that's sort of related to what happens when you allow people without virtues and values to run your stuff. Right? It's not the stuff that's corrupt; it's the people. And if you're not willing to call that out, then it's only going to get worse. It's not like doing away with NPR does anybody any good ultimately, right? The only way to do it good is to fix it. And you can't fix it if you want to tear it down. Like that's not going to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what I told I told my wife, because like the new marriage law, whatever they just did, it's like if people live the right way, it doesn't matter what laws are on the on the
Right.
books. But
Exactly.
so, like because everybody can just choose to not participate in all that stuff. I mean, and I think that I think that's the only real way is that in small areas people just start to do that. And I think the I think it's people are I mean, I don't know. There's definitely some people who are starting to realize that these centralized messages you're getting from media and social media and big tech is not like just something you can take at face value. So
Right.
they're going to start ignoring it more and they're going to figure out their own things. And so, I mean, I try to remain hopeful for the future. I also think, like with the Roe v. Wade thing, I mean, there's going to be over time, like the difference between living in the red states and the blue states is going to be like such a noticeable thing that it's just the contrast is going to become much clearer. And I think the red states are going to be a lot better off, so
Yeah. Well,
overall.
that's already the case, and part of the problem is it's not red and blue, right? It's really
Right.
city and rural. And then it's
Yeah.
like, well, who has bigger cities? And that's yeah, because you get all those weird things like New York, Massachusetts, and California, Republican governors. Weird. No, there's more Republicans in those states. They're not Republican controlled states, but there's more Republicans in those states. It's like, oh, so it's like, well, that's weird. Yeah, that's kind of weird. So yeah, but it does become more stark over time, the differences, and then people get to
Yeah.
choose where they want to live. And I think a lot of them have already voted. Massachusetts is already unsustainable, in my opinion, for salary to cost of living. It's been that way for a long time. And I tell people what I paid for this place, and they're like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." They were like,
Yeah.
"Oh, no wonder why you bought it cash." I'm like, "Yeah, because you kind of can. It's not that much money."
Yeah, by the time we moved, like, so I was probably about, like halfway between, well, I lived in like Milford, so down
Mm.
495.
Oh
And
yeah,
most of the time, like, that was like enough outside of Boston that, like, it wasn't so bad. But over time, it's just like the commuting area just kept expanding, and like, so people live like 2 hours away or whatever, and the housing. So then it's like, well, now these are all Boston price houses, whereas they could have been affordable for regular folks at one point in time. It's not really the case. So
Yeah,
yeah.
everything gets gentrified. It's too bad.
Well, it's not even gentrified. It's just, I mean, I don't know. I guess maybe technically you could say that, but I mean, that's more makes me think of like, when people are cleaning up like the really crappy parts, but it's more just is like, it's just like an elitist mob takes over everything. I guess maybe it's the same. Technically, the term works. It's the same concept, but yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad. Yeah, I think all our sense making apparatus are not serving us. People know it. And they've been, they voted against, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, and all that years ago, right? 20 years of steady decline in viewership. And now, people are scrambling. Who do I listen to? Right. And then Sam Harris blows up. And in my estimation, Brett Weinstein just blew up. Like all these people are blowing up left, right, and center. So it's sad to watch, right? Because they're relying on these independent intellectuals, and then it turns out they're kind of dumb. And it's like, oh well, we can't rely on them. What are we going to do? So it's probably going to get worse until before it gets better, unfortunately. But I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, what other exciting projects have you been working on? Like,
I am trying to record videos. So I did one today. I'm still up in the air as to whether or not it's good enough to be released, but usually I let my editor decide that because so yeah, and I've got to get my office. I'm gonna finish cleaning my office and then put my new desk in here, and then I'll have a standing desk and everything will be different. I'll redo the lighting in the office so I can do videos again. And yeah, it's gonna be messy for a little while.
yeah. Oh. Yeah. Have you watched any interesting things coming out? What have you been, the chatting is like too much to keep up with now. I've finally determined, like, but
yeah, I've been following The Peripheral, which is a TV series based on William Gibson novel, and it's been fascinating to watch because there's a lot of interesting sorts of themes in there. And the Gibson novel is relatively recent; it's 2014 or something, and I was surprised. And William Gibson's like a super famous author, right? He wrote Neuromancer and all the cyberpunk stuff. That's where all that comes from. Neuromancer, Gibson and Bruce Sterling and those guys. Sterling's excellent. I love his stuff. So this is about a bunch of different things. It's about simulation, and it's about time travel, and it's about it's very Neoplatonic, as Vervaeke would say, right? It's very Platonic. It's talking about the soldiers have implants so they can have each other's feelings, and they activate it, by focusing on it or something weird. And so they can act as one unit, and yet they're individual people. And so, all of the sorts of themes that we talk about in this little corner of the internet are absolutely everywhere in the culture. And I just find it so fascinating to watch that. So that's what a lot of what that show is about. So they're using this special headset, and it turns out the special headset is not taking them into a simulation, but actually into the future. And of course, there's one branch of the future because, right, it's gonna end up getting, whenever you do time travel, it gets messy. So
time travel is very messy. That's for sure. Yeah,
that's what you see, right? You see all this fragmentation and dealing with the one and the many, dealing with, well, what does it mean to be part of a community, right? Because it's set in a small town and it's poor, except for the drug dealer who's wealthy but a tyrant, except for the owners of the 3D printing shop, which brings technology into the otherwise grimy and poor town. And yeah, it's interesting. Oh no, I have not read M. Banks' Culture series. No, that sounds like a book, and I don't. Books are no good. Keller, my problem with Keller. Look, I saw the Keller conversation. We watched it on Awakening for Meaning Crisis Discord server, and I forget how many minutes we were in. I think it was maybe 17 minutes. And I had Manuel stop the video and I said, everything this man is saying about AI is a lie. Technical lie. I have papers. I can just show you the white papers. He's just lying about what AI can do, flat out, 100%. And I was pissed. This is my industry. So now we're playing at Mark's playground. Mark doesn't like people coming to the playground, pooping in the sandbox. This is no good. So Keller, like, he just said a bunch of stuff that's wrong. And I was like, no, all wrong, all wrong. I was very upset. And Peterson didn't push back on him. And I was really pissed off. I was not happy. I didn't see the whole conversation.
I mean, now I'm thinking about it, because I didn't finish watching it. I did like when he was saying like, well, like sustainable energy, and we've got like solar panels and stuff. And I was like, wait a minute, like that's not more sustainable, like but
right.
But because we have to remember that they're related, so that's why Jordan has to keep the peace in the family, because he's married to his sister or whatever, I think, right? Something like that.
like look, fair enough. I was just absolutely furious because people in technology know better, and they shouldn't be, and also basic arithmetic. Like, some of these people make claims and I'm like, basic arithmetic says you're wrong. What are you doing? What do you do that? Like you said, solar's not sustainable. Like, what drugs are you smoking? And why can't I have some? Like, if you can be that deluded, I want to be able to be that deluded too. Like, this is nuts. So somebody's done the numbers. Actually, some of the Clubhouse people in Clubhouses, because it started on Apple, is far left. But even they're like, did you know that we don't have enough electric generation in the United States to give everybody in the state of Texas one electric car? And I'm like, yeah, but it's worse than that. Even if we could generate the electricity, we can't transmit it. So now what? Like, these dreams that these people have are so far away from reality. It is just crazy.
Yeah, we were actually talking about this in my company because, our headquarters is the company's, like, the corporate office is all about the woke stuff, and that's, their heads are in the clouds, because they were talking about electrifying the fleet for, because everybody has a company vehicle, and like they said, they did like a test or whatever, like, because I think Ford has like a van that is like full electric or whatever, and they figured once you put all the tools and stuff that a normal like service technician would use, you get about 74 miles a day of range. But like typically we all are driving
in Texas,
like 150 or so miles, like every day,
right?
And then this is the whole thing of like, okay, so part of the benefit is you have a company car that you get to take home, but then if it's electric, well, now you're having to pay for that, or if the company's you're gonna like charge them at the warehouse, so then you have to drive your private car to the warehouse instead of driving the company car to and from work, so you lose big in that benefit. And it's just, so I mean, it's obviously it's not feasible right now, but yeah, it doesn't seem like it even will be for quite a while. Like,
that is the problem, right? It's not that it's not feasible right now, it's that we're not close.
Yeah.
We're not, which is not to say we won't get close, but like, we're 50 years not close. And AI, we're 2, 3 generations not close. These people, they keep saying like, well, really, the neural net mirrors the brain. No, it doesn't. It's not even close. In the 80s, because the technology fundamentally hasn't changed since the 80s. The 80s was the last breakthrough in the core underlying technology. The next breakthrough was the 90s, Geoffrey Hinton at University of Toronto, ironically, right? That was the next big breakthrough. But even that doesn't look like a neuron in the brain at all. And we know this. Like, we absolutely know this. And they don't have memory. They don't, like, we're not, you look at 4D CogSci and what it thinks about the brain, and then you look at AI and you realize they're not even close to mapping the brain. And they should know that.
Mm. Wind is not sustainable either. Yeah, I've seen those because those they only last like, I don't know what, 10 years or something like that. The
Right.
things. Those suckers are massive. Like, I see them driving down the highway sometimes. The big like each blade of the propeller is longer than the truck. So
Well,
yeah.
and people they don't understand any of the limitations, right? They measure all the solar is actually measured based on a 1 hour run at the equator at noon. Unfortunately, there are 0 solar panels at the equator. 0. Like, actually, like, so what, and it's only 1 hour around noon for an hour, as it turns out. So the efficiency vanishes after that. So you've got an imaginary number that you're never hitting wherever you live. And that imaginary number is only good for 1 hour. And after that, the imaginary number goes down. And people they don't understand. And wind is the same way, because with wind, it's way worse. It turns out that in order to get wind to work, not only do you have to have wind, but you have to have wind in the right range. And any turbine you produce will have an optimal range. And all other ranges are not optimal for that turbine. So any number you have for your turbine is not, you're never going to reach that number, basically. Or if you do, it's only going to be for a short period of time. And it's like, people don't understand. The measurements you're being given are false for how it's going to work when you get it.
Well, you know what the real problem too is that the way that we fund these things, always through government subsidies, always just causes so much corruption. Like, I don't know if you ever seen this one. They had the inflatable wind turbine. This is actually kind of cool. So it's like a big blimp, basically, or whatever, but it's like hollow in the middle, and that's where the like propeller is, but it's all inflatable. And so it just like floats up to where the wind is high enough. So, and then you just have a string with the wire coming down, and then so you can move it to wherever the wind needs to go. You can turn the direction of the thing very easily. I'm sure it's cheaper to manufacture than the massive ones they're using, but it's like, no, everybody who has control over this thing has a contract with the government. They're invested in the manufacture of the current technology, so they're not interested in something that would eat up their share of the market or whatever. So
yeah, there's all kinds of weird problems. So it turns out there's 4 spots on the globe that have really consistent wind that are excellent for wind turbine. 4, by the way. There's only 4 of them on the globe, like the whole planet. And one of them is off of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, which I'm sure you know well. And they set up a company, Cape Wind. They were going to put the turbines 50 miles offshore. Now, quick note, you as a human on the planet can only see about 15 miles before the horizon takes over, right? There are some exceptions to this. If you get up high enough, you're on the Cape. You're practically at sea level. You can't get too much higher. There's no mountains on the Cape. They don't exist, right? You're not getting up too high. So 50 miles out, you're not seeing anything. Now, they went to go put those there, and this is like 15 years ago now or something. I mean, this is a long ass time ago, this project. And it is one of the 4 best places on the planet for continuous wind. And that wind is 50 miles south of Cape Cod, and it is right by the shipping. So there's these enormous ships. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen shipping container ships. They're amazing. I've been really close to them. They're fascinating, beautiful, beautiful things. So they're going through there on a pretty regular basis. They sued Cape Wind right? And these are all mostly wealthy liberal Democrats, sued Cape Wind to make sure they could not build that. They spent like 10 years in court suing them until they ran out of money. And the Cape doesn't have enough electricity to this day. They never did. So it would have been really beneficial. It would have served a bunch of wealthy people even. And even the wealthy people can't agree to be pampered by wind power. Like they couldn't do it. You're the very people that keep claiming it's a good idea. So you know it's a scam. Like you know right away they're just ripping people off. And it's too bad. It's really too bad because that would have been a good use of wind power. It was I support. It's the only wind power project I supported in the US was that one. And and people miss T. Boone Pickens. I think it was in the 90s, maybe the early 2000s. He committed $900 million to build a wind farm out your way, somewhere near Texas, maybe closer to the plains. And he eventually gave up because he couldn't make the numbers work. It's not financially feasible if you dump almost $1 trillion into it. It doesn't work. Like it just doesn't work. Like people don't get. It doesn't work. It's not going to give you what you think it's going to give you. It's too bad. It's really sad. Like because I wish we had a magic energy device too, but we don't.
Well, that's the I mean, yeah, it works because for the people doing it because of the government subsidy, which is
well, they make money off of it, but it doesn't really work for them either.
I know.
Well, at the end of the day, they build something hollow that nobody can use, and they made a lot of money doing it. Good for them, but that just makes you greedy. That's all that makes.
Well, I mean, that's the problem is that that's the only thing anyone ever cares about is, no. Well, because we're letting politicians make decisions about these long-term things, but they only have their span of concern is only the next election cycle. And so they're making decisions that are going to affect people long-term, or they're supposed to benefit us long-term, but they're not really caring because on a personal level, they're getting kickbacks and stuff.
But we don't even know what that is. Like we don't know what that means, and that's part of the problem. A lot of people think like, oh well, look, the government decided they needed public transportation, so they built subways and they, ran bus lines. That never happened. Actually, never happened. What happened was private enterprise built all those things, and the government took them over later. And literally, like in the case of the subway system, I don't know how familiar you are with Boston, with the history, but the Boston subway system, which was the first successful subway line in the United States, or in the world for that line matter, right? The first one was in New York City, but it only ran one block. It was an air run, actually. It's kind of cool. But it shut down pretty quickly. So first successfully operation was the subway. And when the owners said they were going to jack up the price, all the people taking the subway got pissed and said, we don't want that to happen. And then they lobbied the government to take over the company. So the government stole the company. I think he got paid, but still they stole the company from him. And then they immediately doubled the rate because they couldn't run it profitably because it's the government. And people think like, well, the government built the subway. The government did not build the subway. That never happened. The government did not build the train systems. That never happened. The government, all the good things you see, 0% of them were done by the government. That's what people don't understand, and that's basically what it is. And I don't think they took it with eminent domain even, because it was a weird relationship. Look, in order to build the subway, you have to get the government to agree because you have to rip up the roads. And in the case of Boston, and there are pictures of this actually, or maybe they're just drawings, but I think there are actual pictures, early pictures. They did trenches, so they broke open the top of the street, dug down, and then filled it all back in, right? That's how they built the tunnels. We didn't have TBMs, right, back in the late 1800s. So yeah, you had to get the government's approval to do stuff like that, right? But they did, but then the government comes in and takes it over later. I don't remember the circumstances of how they did it or whether or not the guy actually got paid a fair rate for the company or whatnot, but it immediately, when the government took over, it immediately ruined the subway system. The subway system was never profitable after that. But when it was first built, it was. And we've told ourselves this narrative myth about, the governments run these public things out of the goodness of their heart and they're making money. And it's like, no, we could make money with them, but we'd have to get out of the government, and get it back into private hands where people will actually do that.
Hello, Jacob.
There's Trump. Hey, Jacob.
My class got canceled.
Oh no! How come?
I'm happy.
What did you do wrong?
So my professor is 85 years old and he teaches online classes.
Remarkable.
And he couldn't get the Zoom work to work tonight, so it got canceled.
Oh, weird.
Did you tell him to
Oh,
start
Zoom's
using
not having
StreamYard?
problems. Yeah, you got to get him on StreamYard, Jay.
No.
No? Oh well. We tried.
What's your thoughts on the history of government subsidies?
So economics is the science of trying to understand things that are very, very complex in ways that are way too simple. And it's not worthless, especially microeconomics. And economic models are useful and should be used. And they should only be used by people who know enough mathematics to know what it means when you say there aren't enough significant digits for you to make that determination. And there's plenty of people who have no clue how important significant digits are when you are doing calculations. And they will increase significant digits by all kinds of ways that anybody who knows the math should know better than do. And when you use bad math, you will get bad results. Why is this in any way surprising?
Well, I don't think it is, but because this is one that I well, I mean, whenever the government tries to like make some, the Sith Lord is here now. Like I remember was the example. So like the in England they had like the gin craze or whatever it was when the government subsidized the production of gin, and like I think it was supposed to be like as an export thing, like they were competing. I think they were like, because brandy was like the most popular liquor and that came from France and England wanted to compete, so they subsidized the production of gin, so they made it very profitable for the people to make gin. And what happened was that you had drunk alcoholic 12-year-olds because gin was so cheap and abundant and plentiful, because the government was always making it, that's what the laws were doing.
Have you ever heard of a budget expenditure?
I mean, I'm sure I've heard these words together, and but
Okay, so let me tell you one great secret of politics. If you take perfectly normal sounding words and you put them together in a string that is perfectly fine and use it as jargon to define a particular term, people will no longer be able to Google it. So, budget expenditure, you can Google that. You will not know what that means. And what a budget expenditure is how our government spends a lot of money subsidizing things that will never show up on the budget. Because the best way to give somebody money is not take taxes at all. And so there are all kinds of budget expenditures, including policy budget expenditures, which create all kinds of subsidies. And it is impossible to run something as large as our government without subsidizing things. For example, where do you put a military base? That's a government subsidy. It's a huge government subsidy. And so the problem here is not that government is trying to do things. Government is going to do things, and we need government. Anarchists are stupid. They're not silly. They're just dumb. Okay. And so in some ways things are so much worse than you can be bothered. So like I was actually getting a master's of public administration and a JD, right? And that is basically as much hands-on government study as you can do. Like it wasn't theoretical. It was how do we run laws, right? And what I saw was depressing like you wouldn't believe. It is so much worse than I can explain to you that I hate talking about it. But I'll talk about it until people like fall asleep, and people will fall asleep. Like if you haven't heard me talk about like how much I hate title insurance, the way only somebody who is an insurance broker and was writing my master's thesis on the title industry and like really knows it in details, you would rather die than have to learn. I'll talk about it all people want. It will put you to sleep. And that's part of the problem. The problem is ultimately we need people who understand what's going on, as well as you understand cabinets dealing with government. And when I, for example, talk about insurance policy, I actually ended up like blocking somebody who was a friend of mine on Facebook because he came on my page and was like, yeah, you're only saying that because it benefits you. And honestly, like, if you know anything about me and you think that my views on insurance, like I run my insurance business in a way that's profitable, it is profitable. But let me put it this way. My insurance business, lots and lots of people, including both my parents, have walked into my office and been like, you are insane. And I am, because I don't put money above what I think is good and true. And that for a lot of people is insane. But it doesn't matter, because when I talk about insurance, I am an insurance broker. And the way you can dismiss me with a bulverism is, oh, he makes his money in insurance. Guess what? You're dismissing anybody who actually knows how to deal with the system, right? And when you do that, and honestly, it's malware, because like it makes people distrustful of anybody who could possibly actually tell you what the problem is.
Right. It destroys expertise as a value. Right. When in fact, yeah, look, they're people don't want to be told you're not an individual. Right. You can't think for yourself. As my good friend Jacob did a video on recently. Yeah, you're not thinking for yourself. That already didn't happen. You grew up with parents and they gave you a bunch of stuff by virtue of being there and acting in the world. And you can be traumatized by that for sure. But you also have to get over it because it happened. Like it's not going to not happen. There's not an alternate reality where you just pop into the world conscious and ready to go. Like that, none of these are options to you. So people don't want to hear. You have to rely on people that know a mind-numbingly boring amount of detail about things and trust them. And sometimes you'll be wrong because sometimes you're wrong. It's another message people don't want to hear. And you have to deal with all of that. It's almost like we're living in a fallen world and original sin is real or something. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. It's crazy.
Original sin, but yes, I have similar theological ideas to what you're saying. But yeah, ultimately, the biggest problem, like the reason we live in clown world is because we insist on only listening to clowns.
Yeah. Well, when you think you can get away with not listening to experts, the people that come rushing in are the clowns. Like, bring in the clowns, bring in the clowns. Like, no, you should listen to the experts. And there's some back and forth. Like, I would argue that the brilliant job that Carl Benjamin did as Sargon of Akkad in talking about Gamergate and making predictions about what was going to happen, which he did back in 2014 or 2015. You can watch the playlist on Gamergate, listen to all his predictions, all of which came true, right? That gave him credibility, and now he's got a news organization in the UK, which he self-funded, which is just mind-blowing to me. If you have any idea how expensive it is to start a business, that's fine. Now, multiply that by like an order of magnitude and think about starting a business anywhere in Europe because it's massively more expensive. And he did it, and he self-funded the whole damn thing. And good for him. And now people do trust him to some extent, and that's good. But rebuilding that trust, Tim Pool got a lot of trust, right? But he found a loophole in the system, so good for him.
I sent Tim Pool money, and I don't absolutely regret it, but at the same time, it's like I've sent a lot of people money and it's not like I have a lot of money, but I have to say, ultimately, if you are not willing to send $5 to someone, then you're saying I don't value what you're doing as much as I value going to Starbucks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't value going to Starbucks. Jacob, did you read Nassim Taleb? Have you read Taleb's stuff? Because he talks a lot about economists.
I have. My problem with Taleb is he is lazy. He's brilliant, but he is lazy. And so
he's a flaneur. Yeah, kind of definitionally.
He is best understood by having somebody else go through the mountain of shit he puts out and digs out the gems that are invariably there, right? And frankly, I don't feel like actually digging there for the gems that he's brilliant, and we need people to pay attention to him. I just don't like being the person who does.
Yeah. Oh, I would recommend his books because I actually think all of his books are really excellent. And one of the themes of his books is, and he says this quite clearly, although he's been a little more fair recently. Although you know me, I like the hyperbole. All economists are frauds. Like he says it like over and over, and then he points out all the bad statistics and the bad math and all over his books. So it's really good. And I've actually read all but his latest book twice, which is super unusual for me. I usually don't read books once, much less twice. But yeah, they're that good.
I have to say, I just have too many problems. There's a lot he says which is good. There's a lot he says which sounds good initially, and you have to do the legwork to actually see if it's true or not, which he refuses to do. And so certain things he says, and they bother me. I have a very low tolerance for people who say things that are bad.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, I think his Twitter, like I've got massive disagreements on him on Twitter, but like his books are excellent.
I've read too much of him that makes me cringe and makes me just not able to. I am fine with him through a filter, and I often hear brilliant people that I am willing to listen to quote things that he has talked about, and I quote things that he has talked about. Lindy Effect, Black Swans, right? So again, it's just there's a lot of quality there. We're talking about Nassim Taleb, Rabbi Malot. There's a lot of quality there, and there's a lot that, especially, I think, probably because I tend to be very intensely, like, economics is something I actually care about a lot more than the vast majority of people do. And I've studied a lot more than the vast majority of people do. And like risk, which one of the things which drives me insane is that what what Taleb does is called risk management, and what I do is called risk management. And these two things are not the same at all. And the reason they are called risk management is precisely because the powers that be, and this is something, so Eric Weinstein is also a risk manager, and I've discussed this with him, and he agrees with me that the reason the establishment insists on calling what I do risk management instead of just give me any other name, just like choose any other name, or what they do risk management, just choose any other name, right? Deliberately to cause confusion, they use two different definitions of risk so that people don't understand what's going on. And it's like, you can tell how emotional I get about this.
Well, no. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that, right? Charlatans like to hook their wagons to legitimate concerns, and yeah, I mean, Taleb started a project years ago. Actually, I was too sick at the time to attend, but I thought about it. Where he's got the Risk Institute, which is very interesting.
But he's
and
talking about a very different type of. He's talking about what we call speculative risk, and I work in pure risk, and like nobody has any idea what pure risk and speculative risk are, especially since speculative risk includes pure risk, and it's like they refuse to come up with a term that means non-pure speculative risk, which is like, why would you do that? Oh, right, because you want people to be confused.
You want people to be confused. Yeah, but there's a long history of that. I mean, the charlatans need to hide under something, and that's what they hide under, unfortunately, for the rest of us. Yeah, it is too bad. But yeah, I mean, I like his books are great. They're really easy to read. I really enjoy and appreciate his books. I hate his Twitter threads. They're just, most of them are terrible. The people that quote him, there are Twitter threads out there that just quote him, and they're brilliant because they're just taking from the books, and the books are great. So yeah, it's interesting. And he's got a book of aphorisms too, which is cool.
When he talks about theology, it's funny. He does a much better job than a lot of people, for example, like Dawkins. And he's like correcting Dawkins, and it's like, yes, you are in fact correcting him, and I am kind of sort of happy, but you're not great either. I have to say, like, again, Nassim Taleb, I'm glad people are paying attention to him. He said he is brilliant in certain ways. I am happy he's there. It's just my low tolerance for noise mixed in with signal that makes me not be able to, actually deal with it.
It's too bad. He hates economists just like you do. So I feel like you guys would be fast friends.
Too much. I think economics actually has. Let's, for example, if I could nominate a king of the world, I would be perfectly fine with Glenn Loury as king of the world. He actually understands economics. He is an economist, and frankly, even Mark Blythe, I don't know if you've heard of him. He is he is a political economist that I disagree with a lot. Like, he is certainly a person on the left, and I have a lot of values disagreement with him, but he is really, really smart, and he's not a clown, right? And I value listening to people who are not clowns who disagree with me. And so there are definitely economists we should be listening to. But again, Clown World would prefer we listen to, let's say, Richard Wolff. God. He is a Marxist economist. Which means
Marxism doesn't understand economy. Like that's an interesting contradiction in my mind.
Oh, he's a charlatan. He makes
supposedly. I got that right away, because Marxism doesn't understand economy. Yes.
Right. And so Well, kind of. We are talking about macroeconomics a little bit because macroeconomics is where all the BS in economics is. And I think so. Again, if you understand significant digits, if you understand statistics, if you understand complex models which cannot be simplified, macroeconomics can be somewhat useful. If you have enough wisdom to, yes, Wolf is definitely an idiot. If you have enough wisdom to recognize that your model is, all models are wrong, some are useful, that you actually need empiricism, which was what drives me insane about the Austrian School of Economics. They are, and it's so funny how many like anarcho-capitalists and libertarians, when I mentioned that the Austrian School of Economics says we do not believe in empirical economics, they think I'm lying. And it's like, no, go look it up. And then they go look it up, and then they find somebody in the Austrian school who's arguing that empiricism might not be the devil Satan. And like that suddenly tells them that no, it's okay to be empirical in Austrian, as opposed to, hey, if you do not have an empirical outlook on economics, you need to STFU. And yeah, I could rant about this stuff forever.
Really? Could you? I hadn't noticed.
I'm guessing Michael has better things for me to rant about. I was actually talking to somebody today who's lurking in the background, and he mentioned wanting to talk to you, Michael, because you're smart. And I agreed with him.
Oh, okay.
You agreed with somebody, Jacob? Whoa. Michael, write this down. This is like a mark it on the calendar. It's a big deal.
Jacob, did you see the newest perspective on Paul? That
I did not. Where was this? What was this?
It's a clip I made on. I put it on my channel, but it was an excerpt. What?
When did you put it out?
Yesterday, but okay. It was from a video of somebody reviewing the queer gospel, but but the plot was that Paul wanted to kill Jesus, and he duped Judas into killing Jesus. But Judas felt betrayed because he was secretly bisexual, and he was betraying his true self. I don't know, but
how long is this video?
2 minutes.
We should watch it. You should pull it up. We should watch it.
My clip is 2 minutes. The full video, which is linked in the description, is like 10 minutes long. But
we don't do it 2 minutes.
No, we don't. No,
yeah, let's do the 2 minutes. This sounds awesome. Well, awesomething. Maybe not awesome, but awesomething. Action packed. It does sound action packed. I agree.
All right, let's see here. Okay.
Who is SBM?
I don't know.
Me neither.
All right, is that showing on the screen there?
You have to add it to the stream.
Oh, right. Let's see.
So just click on it. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
There we go.
Now, as we move on to the New Testament portion, we're introduced to Paul the Apostle, who we're told wanted to take power and control over everyone by defining gayness as a sin. And so Paul wanted to kill Jesus, who the book calls Jesu, says Jesus was non-binary. We read, Paul stood in front of it, addressing his mob of angry homophobes. Today, we should make right this terrible act of rebellion that Jesu, which is the Jesus character, has committed daily by simply existing. It's time for us to end this queer preaching and return the people to rightful silence. And in Paul's unadulterated hate, he was able to convince Judas to help him kill Jesus. But of course, Judas had a hard time betraying Jesus, but the reason why is because Judas was actually bisexual and was having a hard time betraying his true self. So after that betrayal, Paul rounded up everyone to crucify Jesus because he thought that by killing Jesus, it would force people to become straight. So just after he stabs Jesus in the stomach, he says, "Here now you see, Jeff hath carried the sins of the queer and the sins of sedition, the sins of those who would love to think freely for themselves. He hath carried your sins and given his life for them. Just who here dies so that the lot of you may be cleansed," Paul shouted to the crowd. And then, of course, the crucifixion happens. After Jesus died, Paul's homophobic gospel spread all throughout the world as a result. And as time went on, the church raised a violent army to harm and kill gay people. Of course, as time went on, the church continued to willfully deceive and manipulate everyone. Their most fantastic deception was, in fact, the most simple. By demonizing everything natural about a human life and the human body, the men of cloth were able to create a fundamental and deeply rooted sense of shame and guilt sewn into the fabric of society. All of the basic needs of the body, from hunger to sexual desire to the passing of gas and even the need for sleep, were held in contempt by the church, all while they claimed to see divinity in God's creation. By assaulting every essential aspect of being human, the clergy were able to rob people of the most basic beauties of life. This abuse continues even to this day.
Okay. I will say that I was 100% correct when I said anybody who tells you to think for yourself is in fact your enemy. And you'll notice they were using the think for yourself thing there. So like
Yeah.
I was vindicated.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I mean, it's great that we can live in a world where people can be so foolish and so insane that we can laugh that hard. I mean, that's a lovely thing.
Well, I mean, the point he makes too is it's like, obviously, like the person that was writing this wants, like, they must like be some sort of like extremely progressive Christian, or as they consider themselves, and wants like people to have more compassion on queer people by writing this, but it's just making everybody hate
Well,
Christians
maybe.
for being small-minded, and like it's not having it's not going to have the effect that they think it would.
Yeah, it's going to make people hate gay people even more. And
gay people hate Christians too.
It was really funny that like it included the hatred so many people have towards bisexuals in the LGBTQ 2 A B C D E F G community. But if you haven't watched Preston Sprinkle with I have no idea what this person's name is. What is a trans deacon, like priest in the Anglican Church on Unbelievable with Justin Brierley? I highly recommend it because you can actually see the trans person, like, first of all, completely deny things that anybody who's paying attention should realize is actually happening, and B, recognize that basically Preston Sprinkle knows a lot more than they do, and it was actually a tour de force by Preston Sprinkle. I have a lot of respect for Preston Sprinkle after that. Do you know who that is?
I've seen him on another talk to another another guy in an interview. Like he was explaining, it was about like why or why not like the word homosexual should be or should not be used in the New Testament. Like, so it was interesting.
Yeah, he's been on Paul Vanderklay's channel and Paul brings him up sometimes. Luke is actually a huge fan of him, and he does a great job for the things he does. And basically, what he seems to be doing is inoculating a lot of evangelical and traditional Christian churches against gender ideology, which more power to him. The guy's doing God's work. But he gets attacked. It's funny that he gets attacked by supposedly very conservative Christians for like not being just obviously hateful and stupid.
The Bible says so. The Bible says so. Just not.
No. Beyond that, they're like, he was nice to that person who's trans, and he's like,
okay,
yeah. you mean he was a Christian?
Yeah.
Yes. With Christina Beardsley. I think that's it. Yeah. It was really good.
Well, that's an interesting thing though, because how much of that whole thing is being influenced by pharmaceutical and medical industry that's getting support for this stuff, not through an open, like, fair marketplace of whatever, but because of the way that our systems have funneled the money to them, like they're incentivized. Well, because so every time a kid says I'm trans, it's like whatever, I think it's like $700,000 or whatever,
Okay,
but that
does exist. Does exist. Ultimately, though, I have to say there's a lot of Baptists and bootleggers going on, which, if you have not heard of that term, please do learn what that term is, which is the way I like to illustrate it is, in California, we have a senator who recently got out of prison, and he was the biggest gun control advocate in the California Senate by far, and helped pass a lot of gun control laws. And he went to prison because the Chinese mafia was literally funding him in order to keep the price of illegal weapons in California up, right? And he was caught doing that. And it's like, really? Something that insane happens? And it's like, no, it's called Baptists and Bootleggers, and you can read the Wikipedia article, and it happens all the time when you're talking about public policy. Because anytime you have large enough groups of people who are making a decision, you will end up with people who support the same decision for very different reasons. And it's not just those two reasons. So you end up with pushes towards anything. And this is how legislatures work, right? So how does a bill get passed? You get 300, rarely get 300, so we have 435 people in the House of Representatives and 100 in the Senate. So you need 51 members of the Senate to support something. Actually, with the filibuster, you used to need 60. And so getting 60 out of 100 people to agree on something always requires people to agree for the wrong reason. So this is a famous case that still gets kind of debated, but apparently the senator who put in sex into the Civil Rights Act of 1964 did it because he wanted it to be so ridiculous that he wanted to compare sex with race, right? And he wanted people to be like, oh, well, obviously we can have separate gender bathrooms. So obviously, I guess, according to his thinking, we can have different race whatevers, right? Which is not as insane as whatever, but like the other people who were for including sex in the civil rights legislation were not thinking the same way. But that's what happens anytime you have complex policies. So what's going on in what's going on regarding trans issues, one of them is there are people who are making good money out of it. There are other people who should realize it's going to cost them a lot of money and they're not. But there's also something else going on, which is there are people who are trying to deconstruct gender completely. And then there are the pedophiles, and there are pedophiles. And then there's also Russia and China who are very, very happy to see us ripping each other over stuff. So, like, yes, that is one component of what's going on. Unfortunately, I don't think it's the biggest component, because if it was, it would be easier to disassemble this whole thing. But it is happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I'm just saying that's an important aspect of it, in the sense of, because you think of, so you have our elected officials who are, you know, people who want to remain popular and electable and go with whatever is the thing. And then you have some lobbying agency, which somebody who has money, that has influence, and says, these are gender affirming surgeries. They should be a basic right. So it shouldn't be something that people need to be wealthy to pay for. Government and insurance should be used for this. So, and then the people say, oh yeah, we should affirm them, and they just sign it. And so that's just saying, like, because pedophiles, well, except, you know, like George Soros, don't have the money to just
Okay, so unfortunately, the pedophiles are much more popular than you seem to understand.
Well, I'm just saying any random. I'm just saying, you know.
But okay, I'll give you an example of something else, which is there are insurance companies who are wrongly thinking that, hey, you know, if we pay for this surgery, it may be $10,000, but do you know how much it would cost at $200 a visit for 50 visits, 50 weeks of therapy? And at some point, it becomes like, just give them the hormones, and we won't have to deal with it this year. And so you get insurance companies that are being very, very short-sighted, because their plan year is just the year. Don't get me into this. I'll put you to sleep. But there are many anytime you see something that's this insane, it's overdetermined. There are at least 3, 4, 5 different causes for why something this insane is still happening. And the fact is, most people can't think of more than 5 causes. Like, once you have more than 5 things causing the same thing, and not one of them is a but-for cause, meaning that if that wasn't part of the cause, so a lot of people think all causes are but-for causes, right? So let me try to think of something that's a but-for cause. So I have water in my cup, right? And one of the causes of me having water in this cup is that there is a working water machine in my office. It's not the only cause. Another cause is the fact that there is electricity here, right? And another cause is the fact that I rented an office here. And like, so if any of those goes away, it's possible that I would otherwise have gotten water. For example, if that water machine wasn't there, I might bring water and put it in the fridge, right? So having really complex causation in really complex systems makes it really hard for a lot of people to think about it. And as long as we don't really need to talk about it the way we are, that's fine. The problem is it's gotten so crazy that people who are, let's say, carpenters or coders or insurance people are like looking at the medical industry and going, why exactly are you doing double mastectomies on 14-year-old girls, right? And when you get to that level, I highly recommend anybody who is listening to this and thinking, hey, Jacob makes a lot of sense, to listen to my discussion with Coronius Focus, because it's not the most popular thing on my channel. It is the most high-level discussion I've had on my channel, and unfortunately, I was not smart enough to continue the discussion at the level it needed to be, because I'm not smart enough to talk to Coronius Focus the way Sam Adams or any of the really smart people in our corner of the internet do. And unfortunately, Coronius Focus thinks of things at such a high level that a lot of people can't even understand like the type of genius that he is.
Yeah, I think I like that point because that's just funny. I recorded, I don't know if I'll release it, but I recorded a video on what is science, right? The definition of science so that people can sort of understand. And one of the problems with science and scientific thinking is it tends to boil down causes to single causes so that it can understand that. And that works for some things, but it doesn't work for most things. And people don't know that. And then they get stuck and they're like, oh, science uses logic, reason, rationality. This is one of the mistakes John Vervaeke makes. And therefore, we should just use those tools and we can understand the world. But the bottom line is, most things have so many causes that there's no hope. And if you try to think for yourself, then you're lost. And that's because you're just not smart enough to understand all the pieces that go into things. And it's easy to look, all models are wrong. It's easy to map politics and say, well, they're all just greedy, power hungry people, but that's not true. It's obviously not true, right? Like, what did Donald Trump gain from becoming president? And he knew he wasn't going to gain anything. Like, the poor guy was crucified and he's running again. Like, that doesn't make any sense to, unless you really care about something bigger than yourself. You do not want to be president of the United States. Like, that's never going to, you don't even want to be a senator or a congress. You don't want that. Like, that is not a good life. Like, even for the bad people who, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who can benefit from it, it's still rough on them. I mean, she gets batted around quite a bit, rightfully so, I would say. But it doesn't matter. Like, there's still a toll there. And people don't appreciate that. And a lot of factors go into it. One of the factors that people don't understand is we are living in a time and place where people are perfectly willing to engage in behavior to bring about a world that they believe they can be the hero in. So if they lived in Nazi Germany, they know that what they would do for sure. And so they want to live in Nazi Germany because then they can be the hero. I'm not joking. There are people like that out there. And they're out there rioting alongside the anarchists. They're not anarchists. They're people who want fascists in power that they can fight. And they see the anarchists from their perspective as useful idiots. And the anarchists know, well, they aren't anarchists, but they're useful idiots, right? Everybody thinks everybody else is a useful idiot when they're participating in something that is a proximal goal that they want together, even if that goal is not the end goal, right?
Red Trek says science is really good at dealing with the highly repeatable. Most things don't really repeat. I have to say that is one way of doing science mechanistically. And people who are not very good, and this is where Brett Weinstein is correct in his criticisms of science. And I don't often bring him up because I think he gets so much wrong. But I think one thing which he identifies as like the only problem, it's not the only problem, but it is a major problem, is a lot of people who are doing the science believe the science, and they're not educated in science, they're trained in science. I watched your video today. And
Thank you. Good call out then. Navigating patterns, education versus training.
I'm not sure I like that framing. I understand what you're trying to say. Look, this is something. Now I'm going to go back to the Protestant thing so Michael Sartori can try to defend his Protestant heritage. But this is part of like the priesthood of the people thing, where like not having elites and not having an aristocracy and everybody's equal in the eyes of God. And it's like, this is where it gets crazy because there are certain things that are just too complex for some people to understand. And people who go to a mechanic, you know, they are fine marveling at the work of a mechanic because they see the results, because it's simple enough for them to understand that what they tried to do in fixing their car doesn't work. And nobody goes around saying, criticizing, you know, the mechanics who are really, really good. Whereas, and that's where Elon kind of gets away with it. Whereas every idiot in the world thinks they have a valid opinion on Supreme Court opinions. And let me guarantee you something. If it's something that's at the Supreme Court level, if you don't have an above average IQ, you probably should just shut up. And that's at least half the people. And I guarantee you, half the people are not silent about their really important opinions about what the Supreme Court should be saying.
Hey, Chad.
Hey there. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Cool.
You're very, very dark.
Yeah, I'm low lit here, guys. I'm driving, so you might get my face in there. Weird. What are you guys talking about?
Oh, you know, everything that's wrong with the world, apparently.
Okay.
Which is Protestantism.
Well, see,
Yeah.
so
I think it's
if
just people.
if the principles of sphere sovereignty were applied, government would have more clearly defined boundaries of what it is for, and it wouldn't continuously encroach onto other things. And those other areas of life would have their own systems. There's not no hierarchy, but it's this thing of, you know, it's almost like within a body you have separate organs. They have to be separate, like and you know, you can't like, if you had conscious control of your organs, the part of your brain that thinks doesn't know what to tell your organs to do, so it would really screw things up. So
True, but as Paul Vanderklay says, it used to be that we sent the smartest and brightest to theology school because theology is the queen of the sciences, and it's really important that it remain the queen of the sciences. And I think there's, you know, if your denomination does not have schools of theology, and Eamon Wilson actually put this best when I had my conversation with him. He was brought in as a psychologist to evaluate people who were going to become lay deacons not lay deacons, permanent deacons in the Roman Catholic Church. And a permanent deacon is somebody who will never become a priest, right? So it is the equivalent of a lay leader, or an elder in a Protestant denomination. And his response to that was, if this is what they do, like have psychological testing for their permanent deacons who can never become priests or bishops, right? What are we doing? And it's not like he didn't go to one of the best theological seminaries that Protestants have in the United States. He did. And apparently they're much better than I had feared they would be. He went to Westminster. And but ultimately, I think I hit the nail on the head when I, being the genius that I am, figured out Protestantism works really well for conquering new territory. It's really bad for governing a mature society. And that's why it worked so well in conquering the Americas. And that's why it is in many ways falling apart in the face of the United States becoming a more mature society.
Yeah,
I just
maybe. I think part of the problem is that government is part of the body. It's part of the container. It's not the whole container, but it's part of the container that holds the thing together. And so it needs hierarchy and it needs boundaries. And those boundaries, that hierarchy affects everything inside the container, right? And getting it right is impossible, but you have to have it. And you can't just count on it emerging from magic, right? Because now you're stuck in the science trap. This is exactly the mistake the scientists made. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they were saying, yeah, but what about Friston's free energy? And what about this? And I'm like, those are all bottom-up emergence approaches, right? But the problem is they can't explain why the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And if you don't have leadership, authority, structure, right? If you don't have these components, then you're not building something that's going to last. And that doesn't mean it can't stay for a very long time, because things can stay for a very long time. Like 7 bad movies in a row doesn't kill the Disney Corporation. 9 might, right? But 7 didn't, right? Like that's not sustainable. And everybody knows that. But they don't know when Disney's going to collapse, right? And Disney could right the ship very easily, in many people's opinion, right? So it's not clear when a structure goes bad, how long it's supposed to last. And so you look at the crypto market. Crypto had a boom, and then it had a crash. And it's gotten crashier, right? It crashed twice, basically, with first the price of Bitcoin went down, but then the FTX collapse has really kept it down. And so nobody saw that coming. Those people didn't realize the thing they were building that was decentralized with no structure and no boundaries wasn't going to last longer than it did. And I was surprised that it lasted as long as it did, because it never had a chance. It's very bottom up, emergent only.
Well, you make a really good point with saying Disney can right the ship. This is something the example I like to give is, if you don't have circuit breakers on your house, none of the insurers I work with will insure your house. And there's plenty of people, too many people, who are like, but my house didn't burn down, so you were wrong. And it's like, no, because just because statistically your house is unlikely to have a house fire doesn't mean it doesn't make more sense not to have all these close calls. Because if there's a 5% chance of something and you do it 20 times, it's not 100% chance that you will, in fact, it will happen, but you will have a greater than 50% chance that it will in fact happen. And so it would be really, really it would behoove you to decrease the chance of something that has a small chance of happening even less. And that's where I think things get too complicated for a lot of people to even consider. And anytime you get into probabilities, there are a lot of people who just don't understand that.
Well, and that's what Taleb talks about is a small chance with a large bad outcome is different calculation than a small chance with a medium bad outcome. But I wanted to address what Bazzini said here, right? Look, I think that mainline Protestantism gave up their container. They didn't lose it. And part of it was they were perfectly happy to defer to government. And that worked when the government was also not corrupt, right? But then as the government corrupted, the churches kind of followed suit because you can't blame the top down for these problems. The courts in the US didn't become corrupt because the courts became corrupt. They became corrupt because corrupt people got involved in the courts, right? The churches didn't go south because the churches, like magically God came down and corrupted them, right? They became corrupt because bad people got in the hierarchy and you didn't kick them out. And it's the same with all these structures. The structures are made up of the people. That's why the solution isn't tear down the government, right? Because that always ends the way it ends in the French Revolution, with the people who said tear down the government getting eaten by the monster in the wake of the government. And then you have Napoleon. Great. Fantastic.
Well, the lecture that I had in my video is interesting. I didn't put the whole thing in, but he would say, I mean, you can say Protestants are the ones that did it, but it wasn't even, but he's even criticizing the problems that they did because it was who holds the power. So if the state holds the power, then they are justified in having control over everything. They say the state is the whole container and everything falls under the purview of the state. But the contrasting thought was no, that it's individuals. So this is the problem. There's individuals, which is, I think, probably better. But ultimately what happens is that individuals end up giving their power and authority to the state, and either in the form of like 51% majority, or in more what happened in America is that, our government has just grown to oversee, they've expanded their what they are in charge of through all the different agencies and things that are added on, and that was, which arguably, is that something government should necessarily control? And, I think that's where a lot of the problem lies.
I don't like the postmodern narrative of power. I think it's just a wrong way to think about anything in the world. Power always comes from below, always. And you have to give your power up because you can't think for yourself, Jacob. Jacob doesn't understand this. But anyway, you can't think for yourself, right? There's no individual thought.
I don't agree that power always comes from below.
No, okay, how about this? The energy comes from below, and the thing that makes it power is when you feed energy into a structure. When you don't feed energy into a structure, you get a mob, you get a riot, you get a revolution, right? But if you feed it, and that's not to say the structures won't appear, it just appear within that. Of course they will. People will hijack things, right? But when you have a government, for example, the government will collapse if people just stop paying attention to it, literally, because the world is attention. Peugeot's right about that. And so the energy gets funneled into the structure, and then it becomes power, and that power gets wielded by the people in it. And the problem is, if the churches stop taking care of the schools, the poor, the intellectual education, right, or any of those things, because they get corrupt, then the government can come rushing in, and something will fill that vacuum. And what's going to fill the vacuum of something of the size of the church? In my opinion, there's only three real principalities, right? So there's the principality of religion, right? There's the principality of government, and there's the principality of money, roughly speaking, or economics. But we don't like the word economics here. Fair enough. So there's only those three things that are roughly equivalent in structural size to take over all the tasks underneath that have to get done. So when the churches abdicate, the church as structure, the body of Christ, so I'm not talking about specific institutions, when it abdicates its responsibility or that responsibility gets corrupted, so we can look at the resident schools in Canada, you can look at the Catholic schools in the U.S. where people were abused. You can look at the orphanages that were government run and whatnot in England back in the day, right? You can see when the corruption happens and it goes on, then another entity takes over, right? So if it was the church, it's the government. If it was the government, it's the church, right? These things happen, but that's the result of the corruption that already happened. That's not the result of the thing, that took over, for example, or the thing that currently has charge. It's the people in it that caused the problem.
I could continue arguing with you, but I would rather hear what Chad and Michael have to say.
Well, I was thinking about, is this thing working? Because I just drove
Yep.
through my robot spot.
We can hear you.
All right. I was thinking about this idea that I've heard where I think it's some statistic somewhere where immigrants that come in to a new country, they might come in kind of poor and hungry and like very ambitious to get well and be positioned in a place where life is better for them. And then as you go down the generations, you get to 2 or 3 generations later, and something happens with those grandchildren of the immigrants where I can't remember. I don't know, they don't test well. They don't really seem to do very well as far as a standard that their grandparents would have accepted, I suppose. And I think
the Protestant work ethic, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, works really well when you're on the other side of an ocean and everybody who's here is somebody who got on to a ship and across the ocean and started, then in a few generations, you end up with people who are just doing what was being done before, and that's all they know how to do. And if you're not telling them, giving them traditions and structure, and these are the people who would never get on the ship and go to the next place, and they are born here and you can't get rid of them.
Well, I'm what I'm looking at around this is kind of the I think it was Vanderklay who said religion isn't the opiate of the masses, but affluence is like the opiate of the masses. Because it's tough to get moving when when things are going, or when things are good. It's tough to get moving, and I wonder how much of that has if your churches are built on the shoulders of people like that, where of course affluence would be the opiate of the masses, and of course people would leave the churches, and you have this kind of built-in attitude of, well, I mean, all is well, and so I don't really have to work hard to maintain any attitude around tradition or anything like that. So I don't know, it's something like that. I was thinking about that, but another thing that was coming to mind, or that I thought was interesting that you talked about, was Eamon is doing psychological work on Catholics. So I thought that was funny that a Protestant is doing psychological work on Catholics, which is hilarious. And then One other
Having
thing that I was thinking about.
Having somebody from the outside come in is one of the really smart things that I think Catholics often do. Again, I think a lot of Protestants, not all Protestants, but a lot of Protestants don't do as much, which is actually be like, you know what, we have a problem. And if we were to bring somebody in from the outside who's not going to defend the church, maybe that'll make our lives better.
Yeah, and then another thing that I was thinking about today was Vander Clay talked about this. He brought up that quote that Eamon had about Muslim or Islam is to the Middle East as psychology is to the West, and this idea, like, I don't know where in the Bible it really talks about the thoughts that people have, right? And like, do you ever hear the inner thoughts of people in the Bible? As far as I know, I don't know a lot of the Bible, but and I was thinking about psychology as kind of like this self-obsessed thing where, you know, like it's, I don't know, I might be getting off track, but I wasn't really tracking with you guys anyways. You guys were talking about all sorts of stuff that I wasn't really following very well, but there seems to be something, you know, we could say it's the Protestants or whatever, but I just think that that's so silly. I mean, listening to Michael's video on this, where a lot of this come from Aristotle. Was it Aristotle?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, and that made its way into everything. So is it the Protestants or is it just people? I mean, let's keep it real. And we live in a world, I don't care who you are, anywhere on the planet, if you have the accessibility to things that we have, as far as a lot of technologies and things, it's not a Protestant thing. We live in a world where material is so powerful and alluring. It's not Protestant. It's people being lured by very powerful forces, and so I don't
So
know.
I was
Yeah.
talking earlier today with somebody who is just a lurker and decided to contact me and like just lurks. And he said he was watching Mark and Manuel talk, and they dismissively said something was Protestant. And then we started talking, and I started understanding that the problem was, and I pulled him to the analogy that Vervaeke makes, which is, you know, somebody pulls up to you and says, "Excuse me, I'm out of gas," and we understand that he's not actually out of gas. What he's saying is that the car he is in is low in petroleum, right? And so, and because of that discussion that I was having with this particular one person, what was really obvious was that the things that Mark and Manuel were dismissing as Protestant were actually not things that this particular Protestant was in any way in danger of like having faults in, right? And this is part of the problem of a format like we have here is I think it's really important. And that's why I keep on calling things dismissively Protestant and like you know, point out the problems with Protestantism.
But it's stupid.
I think to a certain number, not 100% of the people who are watching, it drives home a point that I do not have a better way of driving the point to. Now, in the particulars, our language is just never going to be precise enough that we can communicate with large groups of people, and this is what's something that Peterson was saying to Kathy Newman, right? Anytime you're talking to a very large group of people, anything you say is at best going to be understood by 90% at best well, and there's 1%. Once you're already talking to 100 people, there is somebody there who is going to misunderstand what you are saying and interpret it as the exact opposite of what you're trying to say, right? And that's just part of the problem of mass communication. And if you are trying to always be so precise, it's just not going to work. You
Right, but
will,
what I hear is when you say that's Protestant, all I hear is you saying something like that's just redneck or something like that. It doesn't. There's something so like derogatory about it and dismissive that I don't see any use to it at all. But that's just me. But I
Well,
mean, it's
I'm going to say, so Protestant is the Catholic word for the people that they call Protestants, who themselves call themselves reformers. And that, I think, is the best essence of what those who are proud of being Protestant or see the value in that are trying to uphold. Because, you know, structurally and in a lot of ways, like the Lutheran Church is most similar to the Catholic Church. But it, you know, the Catholic Church did not have a mechanism to correct certain aspects without somebody causing a big upset, basically. And I think that any of these systems, like there's like the people who still just think like the Constitution is the most perfect thing of all time, and like if we can just go back to like the founding fathers and blah blah blah. Well, there is problems, and we've over time started to see what they are and stuff like that. But there wasn't problems then, like within that generation, because it was everybody who was, figuring this stuff out. They were all on the same page, like in what they meant with these things. So none of it, like there was nobody who was going to twist the words of the Constitution in the way that it has been, in the last 50 years or whatever, or the last 100 years, even within that first generation. And so I think it's just figuring out how to maintain that mechanism that can see what is needs to be reworked, like every generation, basically. Something needs to. And that's the thing with the even with the immigrants, is that they are doing whatever they can to make life work. But then once they provide this cushy life for their grandchildren, then you just have entitled brats or whatever, so
right. But that's not the thing. The thing with that fact is that that's not immigrants. That's everybody. It's all wealth.
Yeah.
3 generations, it's gone, and for the same reasons. Like that's not something that is tied to that one group. All groups have that property, and the problem with the way Jacob uses Protestantism, which I think is mostly correct, is that it doesn't have that structure to maintain and self-correct over time. And they can call themselves reformers, but they're not reforming anything. They're just often doing their own thing. And I think that's why Jacob correctly identifies them as being good at conquering new territory. Because one of the most ignored aspects of our society due to binary thinking is people keep thinking like, oh, you know what? We just run away from pain and we run towards pleasure. That's just observably wrong, right? Or we just look, it's either a structure or chaos, right? So either you're on the side of the anarchy or you're really helping the structure. Like all of these binaries that we're stuck in, we don't recognize that And there is a way of thinking about these things that isn't in that binary. And so the alternative to, we'll say, protesting the church or reforming the church from the outside is to either form a competing church, which the reformers did not do, or stay in the church and reform it, which they could have done but didn't do for whatever reason. So there's an aspect in which the choice that was made to be apart from the Catholic Church creates a whole bunch of problems. But the real problem, to Chad's excellent point, is really materialism, in my opinion, and not Protestantism per se, although the Protestants, I would argue, are more prone to the materialism. The problem is the Catholics aren't immune by any means, and that's why their churches are suffering too, at least in the U.S.
Let me try to defend the use of the term Protestant. And frankly, I'm not wedded to it at all. One of the reasons we use Protestant in this way is ultimately, what dust to dust is saying is correct. Not all Protestants are Reformed, but all Reformed are Protestants. And then I can't get into a fight about what to call Protestants or not. I'm not a Protestant. I'm not even a Christian. But when it comes down to it, the reason why it has become a common thing we say in this corner is Father Eric, for example, who is a Roman Catholic priest, on my channel at least once pointed out that when you look at what was part of the Protestant Reformation and what was the big fight, almost everything has actually been resolved, and the Catholic Church is pretty much like the Protestants won, right? And when I hear Paul Vanderklay say there is a time when we must stop protesting, I think he has a point, and there's a reason why he says that. And so, look, we can spend all our time arguing about semantics and about words and about what would be the easiest way to communicate and not offend everyone and all that. But ultimately, if we are going to have this discussion, anybody who wants to join the chat has to go to Michael's channel, because this is Michael's stream, and there they will find the link to join the chat. There, they should also subscribe to Michael's channel. But when it comes down to it, I am going to continue to call things dismissively Protestant, and I am still going to make fun of Protestants. And there's a reason why I want somebody like Michael there to defend Protestants, or someone like Paul Vanderklay there to talk about ending the protest. There is a need for reform. And if you want to start talking about we need a reformation, right? And we need to reform the Reformation, fine. Start talking about that, and I will push along with you. But I didn't come up with the pejorative use of Protestant here. And there's a reason why you speak about things in ways that other people understand and continues a conversation that we are having. And once again, I have to go back to, this is a mass medium. And with a mass medium, you are never going to communicate the same way you do one-on-one, which is one of the many reasons we need to always maintain small cliques. That's why I want Michael to have his own channel as opposed to just putting things on my channel, and why I told Khazi to start his own channel, and why I told Common Homestead 2016, I believe his channel is, to start his own channel, and why I tell people to go to Navigating Patterns, and right, because ultimately we all have a Dunbar number we deal with, and we can only have conversations so much with, thousands of people listening, many of whom I have never spoken to before. For example, this guy I was listening to today who had no clue what Mark and Manuel meant when they talked about that's just Protestants. And he's asking me, and I didn't actually explain what Mark and Manuel meant at that time, because hopefully Mark would agree with me that so his thing was they were so dismissive of Protestant, but my family is Protestant and I can't just become a Catholic and leave that thing. And it's like, well, that's the type of Protestant, like that's the type of tradition that we would probably hear dismissively say, this is Catholics and Protestants don't do enough of, right? You're trying to have a multi-generational family? Yay, right? So again, things have to be in context of the people you speak to. And part of the problem of broadcasting, and why I keep on talking about the necessity to narrowcast, is there's only so many people you can talk to at the same time while talking about things that are at all controversial.
Yeah. I mean, I had a whole nother conversation while you were saying all that, but I'm sure I'm sure I got the gist of it. Well, I would just say, yes, I don't know. All these terms, we should always protest evil and corruption. So, and I don't really have beef with the Catholics, because it seems like after the Vatican II thing, it's like, everybody can worship in their own way. That's good. And as a Protestant, every time in practice, like I was saying, like, these people, like, okay, you go to a church, join the church, become a member, submit yourself to the pastor and the people that are in there. It's all like, it's just reserving that little card in your back pocket of, if this goes really bad, I'm not going to just go along with anything. So, which, I mean, honestly, I mean, that's the thing is that as individuals, we're always responsible to obey God over men when we feel like there's a contradiction there. So
what Father Eric, and he actually gave the particular things that were at issue, I guess, at like the Council of Trent or something, things I actually don't care about at all, is because they're, so that person who I was talking about is actually here. So yes, it was very nice talking to you, Adam. And hopefully you will in the future be part of the conversation more. But the like, it's not obvious that the things that Martin Luther was worried about, like if he would actually start a Protestant Reformation today, if he was alive. And in fact, I kind of think he probably would not, in fact, do so, because like the Catholic Church he would see would likely be like precisely what he was trying to get. Maybe, I don't know. And until I heard both Jonathan Pageau and Paul Vanderklay say this, I could not say it myself as somebody on the outside. But both of them said the purpose of the church is to die and be reborn, resurrected, right? And it's like, well, if Christians feel comfortable saying that, and I have never gotten pushback mentioning it to Christians before, it's like, I agree with you. Your church needs to die and be resurrected, hopefully as a Jewish church.
Well, well, the denomination that I was a part of for a long time, they had a very strong missions emphasis, and their thing was always that they didn't like plant churches of the denomination or necessarily. I mean, they would like support the churches, but they would go there, they would translate the Bible into that language, they would train local people who know their own culture to become pastors and to build their own churches and start their own churches and then just do what you want. And then it was actually funny because so this is the Assemblies of God. And then it became so popular in some places, like in Brazil, Assemblies of God is just like what they call any church, even if it's not affiliated. And then there was Brazilian people coming and starting churches in New England that they were calling Assemblies of God and doing the same thing, missionizing or whatever, America, which is a good thing. I mean, I think we need more of that. So, I mean, it's just, to me, that it's like the way that organic life flourishes on Earth. It adapts to environments and changes, and that's a much more resilient way of being than trying to have the unconquerably huge megalithic structure, so
Right, but I mean, part of the problem is actually the Catholics do most of that too in a new area, right? They don't. They're not as tyrannical as the Protestants make it sound out at all. I mean,
no,
it was so
that's what I
funny
said. I don't have a problem with them now.
no, but
yeah.
I'm saying, Michael, that they actually do that. So the funny thing happened in Thunder Bay. I was talking to Father Eric, and Paul Van der Clay was right there with us. We're all having this cool little conversation, and I was complaining about, gee, I only know
Hey, everybody, how's
the
it going?
Italian. Hey, Eric. I only know the Italian church, the French church, and the Irish church for the Catholics, right? And I said, one of the problems is they don't really have the passion of, say, the Southern Baptists, for example, which is a very big difference, right? Gospel churches are amazing. And Father Eric said, "Oh no, what you want is the South American Catholics because they're very passionate." And Van der Clay was like, "What?" He was just shocked. And I was like, "Oh, well, of course that makes sense because the Catholics are like that. The different." Unless you've seen the difference in the ethnic churches, like the difference between the French church, Italian church, and the Irish church, Catholic churches is huge. They're almost they're almost a different church. So
Okay,
people don't appreciate that.
There are a billion Catholics, right? And if you don't think 700 million of them think the Pope is not Catholic, you really don't know the Catholic Church very well.
Right. Exactly. And they do go to areas and they adopt the local customs. Now, you can argue that they definitely have more structure than the Protestants. Yes, they do. And they've been around a lot longer too. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I could be wrong, but I'm feeling pretty good. I feel like the numbers are still on our side for the Catholics, basically.
Look, theology matters, and it's funny when people call me a Catholic apologist, and Father Eric has no idea what to do with me because there's lots I don't like about the Catholic Church, and I'm not joking when I say I am the most Protestant of anyone here. I actually think I am so Protestant that I'm Jewish, but when it comes down to it, we are talking with a very particular context when we talk about Catholicism and Protestantism, and that's just gonna be with any language you're going to have and where you're communicating with people. And I think that might actually be my biggest complaint about John Vervaeke is all the neologisms, and I understand why he has. And frankly, I've started thinking imaginal may be a really important way of talking about things, and something that will ultimately end up in the broader thing. But most of his neologisms are just going to die away. And I think there's way too many of them for what he's trying to do.
So
Right. Well, and
I had a hard time understanding what was the conversation about.
I think Chad was sort of complaining about the usage, or what he sees as the overusage of Protestants, and
It's offensive.
Casting.
Okay.
Well, I don't think it's offensive. I think it's accurate, and like this is always my problem, right? Because
Offensive
occasionally,
things can be accurate. Just saying.
well, right, but like, what do you care about? Do you care about the truth or not? Because that's how I divide it up. I actually care about the truth, and if you're offended by it, oh well, like that's not my fault, right? And I'm going to give the example because I do this occasionally. I say, look, that person's evil, and they go, oh, that's not no. And if they're upset about it, they should stop doing it, right? And then I'll stop telling that about them, because it will stop being true. It's not hard, right? If you don't want to think of Protestantism as a problem, stop being a problem, right? It's really not that hard, right? And if it's inaccurate, that's a different issue. Fine, fair enough. If we're saying something Protestant and it's not, that's fair enough. But if it is and you're upset, I don't know what to tell you. Like, if it's accurate, you've got a problem.
Well, you know what's the worst? Paganism.
Paganism is the worst.
Yeah, so like that, everybody can agree on that. So
well, and I think paganism is way more of a derogatory term than something like Protestantism. And it's not like, you're a Protestant, we have to burn you like a witch. Like, there's nothing like that going on. So that's part of the problem, is that people are getting very wrapped up on feeling more persecuted than what is happening.
Well, paganism means, or pagan means of the countryside, right? So it just means like the countryside people.
Well,
I know there's like a religion to it, but it's basically like what
it means not Christian, technically.
Or that too. Well, I guess as far as Protestants are concerned, I feel like we shouldn't use that word either, because we're not really protesting anything anymore. We're Baptist or something. We're like a small ship. I think if you're a Protestant, you're actually anti something. Whereas I grew up, I never actually heard the word Protestant in my life until I was a lot older, or the word evangelical. I was just Christian. And so,
right.
Yeah, it's just like
that this is where I say yes. And when Jacob uses it, that's what he's saying. He's saying that you're identifying against something and not identifying for something. And there are problems with that, which is not to say you can't do it, or it makes you a terrible person, or you're going to burn in hell, or we should burn you like a witch. But it is to say that there is a behavior that is identifiable, that manifests and has side effects that people need to, pay attention to. And I think that's fair.
Maybe a way to attribute the word Protestant is the same way we attribute the word pagan, where it's like everyone who is not Christian, or rather everyone who's protesting Christendom, because at that point, I feel like really the people who are Protestants are probably progressives, because they're protesting the culture to shift in a new way. Not necessarily in a religious way, but they're the ones who are actually protesting. They protested in 2020, like they're the Protestants now.
No, they have the same. No, it's the same problem. It's the problem of identifying against. And I think that is a fair thing to say about that situation. If you're identifying against, instead of saying this is what I stand for, then all kinds of things occur. Like ecumenism is impossible. I mean, I talked to Vanderklay about this. I said, Christians have a lot in common, and they're not talking about that. Instead, they're busy fighting amongst themselves about stupid theology issues that really don't matter. And because they're doing that, because you have a set of Christians actually just identifying against all the time and against each other in many cases, they can't get together to do the hard work that we need done, which is to recognize and fight back against the evil that is corrupting our structures.
Well, how do you fight that back? Like, even if we would, as a church, unite, have a true, Holy Orthodox Catholic Evangelical Assembly. You know,
I-
how would we
yeah.
fight? How would you fight? I don't know.
I mean, it's, I mean, I think that, like, I mean, from my perspective, it's like, it's only because of these weird online spaces. And like, obviously, like, these chats are a lot better than like Twitter. Like on Twitter, it's just like all the Protestants are so dogmatic and they're just arguing about their own little particular brand or whatever. And in real life, like I was saying earlier, like in New England, everybody's church is like 40 people. So ecumenism was like a real thing because it just would go, everybody would, it doesn't matter. It's like, it was all of us Christians against the pagans or whatever, or, not.
But it
physically or
really
anything,
even
but-
wasn't against anybody. It was just like we were Christians, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, in that sense of like, I mean, like in my job, I, my Catholic coworker is one of the people that I can have the best, like, I can actually talk to him about meaningful things in my life because he's a Christian. He's a Catholic, but he's still Christian, whereas like the people who are just non-believers, secular people, like I can only talk to them about work and like kind of boring stuff or whatever, as far, so it's like, yeah, there, the unity is there, and we find it when we're like actually working together and doing things. So I mean, I guess we just need to find more projects to work on.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
you
but-
could always talk to your non-Christian friends about Christ. It's hard, especially if you're not trying to evangelize to them, but just like talking.
Yeah, it's a bad strategy.
No.
It's not a strategy. It's just like I'm just
Well,
or go ahead. I'm sorry.
It is because you want to find commonality with people and you don't want to stand out, especially if it's something they can't understand. Like we're living in an age right now where a lot of people can't, Sam Harris thinks that because you can't see heaven with a radio telescope or a glass telescope that it doesn't exist. I mean, he's so far away from being able to understand anything about the Bible, including how to read any of it, that there's really no point. Like all you're going to do is alienate him and make him look like a fool, right? And then he's going to act out and talk about dead babies in a basement because this is inevitable when you're in a world that you cannot understand using the limited framework that you have.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. But you've got to also be able to get together and call out evil so that you can take the next small step, which is what to do about it. But it's small steps. And the first one is you have to be willing to call out evil. And if you're not willing to say this thing is evil or that thing is evil or this instance is an instance of Satan, manifesting in the world or something, you're going to have a hard time. All the other ecumenism in the universe is not going to save you.
Well, and that's the what like some apologists call like pre-evangelism, which is to say that these people who are so much of like a materialist reductionist, they can't hear or understand anything you say until you can give them that frame breaking epiphany or whatever, where they realize that they're logically inconsistent and that they are act like they don't. So yeah, and if you can find something that they are willing to say is evil, then that is like the first step probably a lot of times. Or or it's like if somebody has something tragic, and then that's like a point where you can actually like suddenly your life is not just about getting a bigger paycheck, and then you can actually communicate on the same level. But there's no point in like talking about like, because there are people where you're talking, if you say something about God, they're just thinking giant space, old man with the white beard out in space or whatever. So
Okay,
It
let's
looks
pick up on the Catholics. Can we all agree the Sistine Chapel needs to be destroyed?
Why does the Sistine Chapel need to be destroyed?
Because the image of Adam
Oh, the image? Yeah.
to the Father has done more theological damage than anything any homosexual man has ever done in the past 500 years.
I can agree that the art needs to be repurposed. How's that? I don't know that the buildings
Well,
need to be. Maybe they do. Maybe they're infected.
I would say no, because I think, like ISIS destroying all of those Babylonian
Okay.
ruins is
It needs to be that particular thing, that particular image of God the Father needs to be removed and put in a museum.
No, no, removed from the world. So Paul Vanderklay recently actually said that he looks like God in the sky. So that was interesting.
No, it is definitely. I mean, and Father Eric agrees that it is a bad image, and it is a problem in Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism coming together. And frankly, it's funny, but it's like the only people who will really hate that image being moved somewhere outside the Sistine Chapel are going to be the Sam Harrises of the world, who want to see religion look stupid.
Well, but to be fair to them, and I think it's important to be fair to them. They don't know their own motivations, and this is very important because people are constantly thinking other people know what they want, even though there is all the psychological literature says no. Like literally every study ever done says no, we just don't know what we want. And so we assume that when people communicate with us that they're accurately portraying their inner self, and they're not. They can't do that. You can't do that, right? Except maybe rarely. And we're not taking all that into account. Like there are undercurrents, there are egregores, right? There are spirits moving things. And they are like and yeah, they wouldn't want it moved for bad reasons, basically, that they themselves can't rationalize. And that's why breaking people out of their rationality, in my opinion, doesn't work. I mean, I think people have effectively a learning disability around the poetic, right? They can't navigate something like the Bible because there's too much symbolism, and they don't have the skills of understanding how symbolism relates to the participation they have in the world. And it's a big problem.
Technically, it is in a museum because that's in the Vatican Museum part. I don't think it's used for any religious services anymore. I've been there, so I took pictures. You're not supposed to, but
you took pictures? Uh-oh.
Yeah.
See, this is the problem with Protestants.
So this is
I didn't have the flash on, so I thought it was okay, but they were annoyed anyway. I don't know.
This is the image we're talking about, and it needs to be disavowed by the Roman Catholic Church.
I think the image itself should not exist. Like I actually legit think that is a dangerous heresy and should be eliminated from the world. I never found it particularly compelling art, but it's certainly the idea that is the relationship, I think, is part of the problem we're having today. I think it's still infecting us.
Is that a Whataburger?
It is a Whataburger.
What is a Whataburger?
Whataburger is like the official burger of Texas.
Yeah.
It's okay. I don't know.
It's just a burger, but it's just fun.
It's
How
pretty
did you
good.
know it was a Whataburger?
What?
How did you know it was a Whataburger?
I just assumed it was because he's in Texas.
And it was a good assumption. Right.
All burgers in Texas are Whataburgers? Oh, Whataburger. Okay.
Yeah.
That means it's Whataburger. It's Whataburger, but everybody calls it Waterburger because they have like just the thick accent.
I used to think it was Whataburger.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a place in San Antonio that I like better, like a little local fast food chain. But we have In-N-Out too. In-N-Out's pretty good, but all the Texas people are like, no, it's from California. We got to eat Whataburger. But they put so much mustard on the thing, it's crazy. Like if you get it like as is.
Yeah, I never get condiments.
I get my In-N-Out burgers mustard fried.
Yeah, but see, that's good because it like cooks it in. This is like 30 seconds of mustard bottle on the burger. Like if you ordered like a Whataburger, like as it is off of the menu. It's just too much mustard.
Well, is there any other deep theological things y'all wanted to talk about, or?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I probably should go to sleep. But
Yeah. What specifically is the heresy with that? Is the fact that God is embodied, or is
God
it the
the
way he
Father,
touches his hand?
icons. So Christian theology is that Jesus is the icon of the Father,
Right.
and portraying God the Father as, I mean, it's just theologically wrong.
Right.
Like it. So it is the province of God the Son, and I hate saying this stuff. Obviously, I don't believe in any of this stuff. Obviously, it's all idolatry. But God the Son is uniquely capable of being incarnate, which and assigning that to the person of the Father or the Spirit actually would is heretical to Christianity.
Yeah, that basically
Well,
makes like three gods.
Well, and the idea that you could get close to touching God the Father is independent of everything else. Like you don't touch the burning bush. Like, come on. Like, none of the references. You're not even supposed to. You're not even supposed to look at a representation of God the Father, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is like not to mention stare at him and come close to him with your finger. Like, this is way off the rails.
Yeah, because I think if I had to guess why he painted it, it's like God's trying to come to you and you're barely even trying, or Adam was, but that's everybody.
He's no. The reason why he painted because he's an evil heretic. Like that's
Okay.
that's actually the reason. Like and they shouldn't have allowed it.
Okay, so that's Adam with reaching out to God, and the God he is reaching out to is not Jesus. And for the peanut gallery, obviously the reason why he ended up doing it the way he did it, in as idolatrous as it is, and why it's in Rome and has become such an image, is because the Trinity is idolatry, and all the makeshift understandings that are supposedly going to get people to understand it in a way that's not idolatrous. 99.9% of all Christians cannot, including priests and pastors, have no comprehension of the Trinity in a way that isn't modalist or idolatrous in some way, which is why the Trinity needs to go away. And there's a reason it's not in your Bible. So if you want to pick this fight with me, I will pick this fight with you. The Trinity, like, I was trying to be nice, but if that makes you like, ha ha ha, I am willing to have this fight.
Yeah, because I'm trying to. I would like to stay with the Trinity until I guess not until I understand it, but I guess I want to like give really Christianity a really good go, and I feel like you only get the verses in the New Testament, and they kind of use language that could be like how you said Jesus is the icon of God. I think that makes really good sense, but it's kind of vague on what that means as far as how they all relate. It just has verses that say they're related, and then that's
The
all we
only
really get.
the only person who made a good defense of the Trinity,
Yeah.
that wasn't, it's a mystery, And look, if you're going to go with it's a mystery, you can do that.
Mm.
Especially as a Catholic, you can do that. As a Protestant, if you're just going to tell me it's a mystery and it's not in your Bible, which obviously it's not, you're going to have problems there. The only Protestant who made an okay defense, I ultimately think anybody who understands the argument is going to realize it's idolatry. But the only person who did that as a Protestant was Pastor Tanner. And it was in our discussion of Neoplatonism when John Vervaeke was on Sam's Transfigured channel. And if you want to go look that up, and look, if you want to go look at Bo Branson's monarchical trinity and you're not wedded to the egalitarian trinity, that's almost defensible. Like, but
Was the I'm sorry to interrupt, but was the other guy, was he the not the monarchical one, but the other one?
Bo Branson is a monarchical Trinitarian.
And then the pastor before him, what was
Pastor Tanner. Why am I blanking on Pastor Tanner's last name? But Pastor Tanner has a pretty big channel. His channel is actually bigger on Twitch than it is on YouTube.
Oh, cool.
And he's kind of involved in this corner of the internet, but he's also a very busy mining executive and a father and the pastor of an actual church. And he has a channel which is actually pretty active. So like, Pastor Tanner's a pretty cool guy. I'm a big fan of his.
Yeah.
He does as brilliant of a job of defending the Trinity and Protestantism as I think you can make. So if you guys want to go and listen to Pastor Tanner, I highly recommend it. But he is incredibly Protestant, and he does believe in the Trinity. God have mercy on his soul. And so,
yeah, because I wanted to. I guess we're getting kind of late, so this is my last thing. But I was listening in when you were talking about Protestantism, and it sounds like to me, Chad brought up. Either Chad or it was you, Michael, I'm sorry, brought the Constitution or something. It feels like there's like a foundational spirit, and I'm sorry if I'm using any words that are idolatrous, but there's like a foundational thing, and then there's like a Holy Spirit that I would say moves. I think we talked about this before, where it's like at one time, libertarianism was the most progressive thing you could do, and now it's a very conservative thing you can do. It feels like, I don't know really how to explain this, but it feels like at one time, especially in the way the Bible describes it, Christianity was the most progressive thing at the time, and now it's a very conservative, foundational. And no offense to anybody, but it just feels like something new comes, it's progressive, and then after a while it endures and becomes conservative. What do you guys think?
But that's a perennial pattern, right? That happens with everything.
Yeah, there's no system that will make bad people act like good people. So whatever the bad situation is, good people will fix it or whatever, or they could just keep that system by if they all become good and the system works with good people. It's like you say, communism would work perfectly if people were perfect, but people are not perfect, so it's not going to work. So
like it had its moment in the sun, but now you couldn't really recreate it.
No, well, it never really did because it's too idealistic. It doesn't account at all for the people's selfish tendencies, human nature, evil, all that.
No, it's parasitic. It's parasitic on other things too.
The systems
it's got
that last
lots of problems.
The longest are the ones that most account for people's greediness and all that stuff. It's not, none of this stuff's perfect. That's why it's like every generation has to figure out how to there's stuff you have to work out on their own, and obviously it's like the best way is for it to be transmitted from parents to children, but every child is copying their parent in something and reacting against their parent in some other thing, and chances are they're not picking perfectly either one. They're copying some of the good and some of the bad, and they're reacting against some of the good and some of the bad. So, it's just there's the thing is, like, people need to repent of their own wickedness and try to love their neighbor and love God. That's the solution. If everybody does that, it doesn't matter what kind of government you have.
That's like the foundation of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then the Messiah would come and like things would be perfect because everybody would know Judaism was always true.
Well, Christianity has the Messiah coming back. It's the same thing.
Wrong Messiah. Wrong Messiah.
There's a question mark on the Messiah.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like if you read the Bible from Genesis to Malachi and then you don't read the New Testament, Zionism seems like the answer. So
no. Are you trying to trigger Chezi or me?
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I think that is a logical conclusion. Like, if somebody out of the blue, like, has never read anything and they only read that far, I don't think they will have
There are way too many Christians who read their Bible, and when they read the word Israel, they literally think of the nation Israel, and it's absolutely idolatrous.
Yeah. Well, I don't. Yeah, I mean, but I'm just saying, if people read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, then they just think Jesus is the Messiah. But if you didn't read the New Testament, that's what I'm saying. I think you probably would end up becoming a Zionist. So,
and unfortunately, way too many Christians have read all the way to Revelation, and they're still Zionists.
Yeah, that's because of dispensationalism. But, well, I think I want to go to bed. But if Jacob wants to stay hosting, or Mark,
I'll probably remove your channel and start streaming on all my channels and like put the background with God in it in the back and stuff if you were to leave.
Okay, well, that's what I'm going to do then. So you want me to just end the broadcast?
Okay.
No, I want you to leave.
Okay, you're going to leave and you can switch stuff. Okay. I don't know.
I can do it right now. I mean, I'm going to remove your channel. Okay. So say goodbye, Michael.